Hello and welcome to Knowledge Curry. Today we are going to talk about a technology which is merely 30 years old, but in this 30 years of existence, it has fundamentally changed the way that we live our lives. It is being commonly seen as a public good similar to air, water and land. We are talking about the internet. And one of the most fascinating things about the internet is that it is one of those technologies which has not at all achieved its maturity. It is constantly in a state of evolution, and there are going to be tremendous changes in the times to come which we all as a society are going to witness. In fact, the word Web3, which you keep hearing again and again in the past few years, is only the recent development in internet which has taken place. Apart from this, many new changes are also coming in the internet, which is very important for us to understand so that we can make the best use of it. So with this, let's get started into the story of internet. So our story begins in the 1960s. This was the time when US and Russia were competing with each other in their space race. Now the US Department of Defense had decided that they would connect different computers which were being used by academicians, researchers and defense personnel in order to share information and data with each other. And this was more or less the initial form of internet. But there was one major limitation, that this network, which was called ARPANET, was largely confined to this small group of people. Now throughout the 1960s, 70s and 80s, this network was used across the world by different institutions, but again in a very closed format. Now the one major innovation which came in this technology was in 1989, and this was done by a computer scientist by the name of Tim Berners-Lee, who at that point of time was working for CERN, which is the European Institute for Nuclear Research. Now in CERN, scientists from different parts of the world came together to do research work in physics and chemistry, and it was very hard for them to talk to each other and share knowledge with each other. Now Tim Berners-Lee identified this problem, and he decided to connect the computers which they were using with each other using three fundamental techniques. So the first one was that every computer should have one unique address. Today we call it Internet Protocol Address or IP address. In fact, you would be hearing the word protocol very often whenever we talk about computers. Protocol is simply a rule which computer has to follow, because computer is a very logical machine, so we have to define specific rules for it to function. Now another protocol which he came up with is called TCP/IP. This allows two different computers to follow a certain set of rules to talk to each other, to transfer data to each other. And the third one is called DNS or domain naming service. This is very similar to having a particular name to a house, which makes it easy to identify, or giving a name to a person so that you can easily call out that person's name. So taking these three ideas together, Tim Berners-Lee was able to create what we now call the World Wide Web. And in 1991, the official website of CERN was launched, and it became the first website in the world. Now the early days of the internet was one fascinating time. When internet became available to the public, people realized the power which internet contained, the power through which you could share information to people from across the world, no matter where they are sitting. This gave rise to a phenomena where we saw people uploading hundreds and thousands and millions of pages on the internet. And while most of these web pages were static in nature, which basically means that you could go and absorb the information from there and not interact with it, it did not stop people from forming huge number of communities. Today we call this collection of static internet pages as Web1, but they were the earliest form of internet communities which existed. Now this rapid increase in the usage of internet, in the production of so many different websites, soon posed a very critical problem. Now as an individual, you can only put up a certain number of web pages on the internet because you are essentially using your own computer server. So at that point of time, some of the most popular websites started seeing the kind of traffic which it was very difficult for an individual server to take care of. Reason why there was felt a need for third-party services who could create the infrastructure where people could easily create content and could also store that content. So this is the phase when we saw the rise of companies like Yahoo, Google, Facebook, which built robust platforms, hired huge servers through which they could store trillions of data points, and created simple ways in which people could share information with each other. This gave rise to what we now call the era of user-generated content, and in other language, this era of internet which we still live in is called Web2. Now these were the positive parts of the development of internet. Now let's talk about how some of the negative part of the internet which we are today familiar with came into being. Now, when companies like Google and Facebook and Yahoo was creating all this infrastructure for us through which we could easily communicate with each other, through which we could store all this data in servers which were outsourced, the one common premise is that in order to give us these services, these internet companies also had to make money. Now, how would they make money? Now, imagine if Facebook started asking you to pay 1000 rupees per month just to use Facebook. Would you use it? Similar thing applies for almost every internet company out there. Reason why you see that while these services are free, what they are charging you with is your own personal data. And they use this data to sell it to companies so that they can make targeted ads. And this essentially brings us to the problem of a lack of privacy in the internet. Because the model of internet business today is largely based on advertisement, there is no alternative but to give up our privacy in order to use all this amazing free service. And while you will see that these internet companies are taking away your data, but they also take your permission to do that. So basically, even for those internet companies, they don't have a choice per se in which they can give you these services without monetizing it in some way or the other. The other threat which we are all familiar with is what we call cyber attacks, where people who are very conversant with the computer technology, they are able to hack away your system, steal your data. In fact, we have seen so many cases of money laundering, financial irregularity. In fact, some of the hackers also pose threat to the security of a nation now. Cyber warfare has become imminent reality for us. So these are some of the threats which we also saw internet bring into society. But then if you look at internet as a technology, you will realize that almost every technology comes with some positives and some negatives. In fact, it's how we use the technology that eventually decides the overall outcome of the technology to the society. So far we have talked about Web 1 and Web 2. Now let's discuss what Web 3 is all about. Now while we discussed that Web 2 has brought lot many innovations in our life, but it also came with lot many problems. And while there was a need felt by a lot of people that these problems need to be solved, there was not really a way for us to solve these problems, and this was resolved when blockchain was discovered. Now it is because of blockchain that you see this entire evolution of Web 3 is hitting the market. What essentially is very different about an internet which is based out of blockchain is now there's no real need for a centralized agency or centralized player to give us an infrastructure on which we can make content and create content and share it with the world. In a blockchain based internet, computers from across the world can get connected with each other in a decentralized network where all of us can become members and start contributing to it in return for fair rewards. Web 3 also solves one major problem of Web 2. Here in Web 3, while you create a content, you are the absolute owner of that content. In fact, this is why you see NFTs getting very popular. NFT is essentially a Web 3 application in which you create an asset and get digital and legal ownership of that asset, which was never possible in the world of Web 2. In fact, if you take the example of Ethereum, it basically is a blockchain which connects different computers from across the world in the form of nodes together in a decentralized way, and you can think of it as a world computer which is available for everyone to use without anybody's permission. So you would see that with Web 3 there is great rise of different communities across the world based on similar interests. So there are three unique features of Web 3 which makes it so very special. Number one, in Web 3 you don't really need to give away your personal information in order to use the infrastructure of the internet. You can think of Web 3 as this giant world computer which is completely decentralized and where you have access to every node, every server, because all of this is basically public good. And because you're not giving away your personal data, so obviously there is no fear of your personal data being stolen by someone. Point number two, in Web 3 you will get fairly rewarded for the kind of contribution which you are making to the internet. Now while in a Web 2 world, whenever you put up some content, advertisers paid money to the central company which was hosting your creation, whereas in the world of Web 3, you completely own your creation in the form of an NFT. Reason why, if an advertiser has to show some ads to you, and when your creation gets sold to others, you get the direct royalty of that creation without seeking anybody's permission or without paying any sort of a transaction fee. Just like we have equity which is traded in the equity markets, so in the same way a community can come up with tokens which can be traded in the crypto markets, essentially giving a value to that community. Despite that, if a company were to advertise to your community members, that company will pay some reward, and basis the protocol decided by the community, part of the reward which comes to the community will be shared by you who are the member of the community. Another fascinating development which is taking place in the world of internet is the rise of what we now call the Internet of Things. So with the evolution of internet protocol, while earlier in IPv4 there were only a possibility of 4 billion unique IP addresses. Through IPv6, now the bandwidth for that has increased to many trillions, which can include almost every object that we have in our daily life. And that is what Internet of Things is going to do, like refrigerator, washing machine, our car keys, lights in the house. All of these will get connected to the internet, which means that while you are in a different part of the world, you can control everything in your house right from a simple app which is there in your mobile phone. Now many more such developments will constantly come in the world of internet, because as we discussed earlier, that this is a technology which is constantly evolving, and what will be the final phase of this technology is something that none of us are aware of. So at Knowledge Curry, we'll be covering many of these topics like blockchain, NFTs, DAOs in the future videos. So do subscribe to us so that you don't miss any of them. If you enjoyed the video, do like it so the YouTube algorithm can make us reach more curious people like you. We will see you soon in the next video. Till then, stay happy and stay curious.